All right, well, I think we can hop in and people continue to join us. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited to have this conversation with you all. My name is Zoe Newcomb. I'm an associate program manager at Humanity United. And alongside my colleagues, Namfundo Walaza and Pedro Portela here, we're a part of a partnership called Cohort Zero that accompanies a growing network of diverse young South Sudanese peacebuilders called 641M, which stands for 64 Children of One Mother, representing the 64 tribes of South Sudan. They work together, taking creative approaches to building relationships across social boundaries and modeling public cooperation in a very highly polarized context. Cohort Zero has members from the Hive Mind Institute, the Unyoke Foundation, Humanity United, and Search for Common Ground, and formed out of a desire to reframe and unlearn traditional power dynamics and adopt an approach in which we're learning how to follow and be responsive to the leadership of our South Sudanese partners. We're here today to have a conversation about what it looks like to accompany and invest in building these types of resilient networks, all the while navigating some of the ways that COVID-19 has changed the peace-building landscape for all of us. One of those very critical challenges is a lack of connectivity to peacebuilders in contexts like South Sudan. We would have really loved to see members of the 641M network here on this panel instead of ourselves. But obviously the digital format has made that really difficult. So instead, we've asked a number of the members of the 641M network for their reflections on building their network during COVID-19 and responses to the questions that we'll be discussing. And we've woven their audio into the conversation that we'll be having today. So we'll be doing our best to maintain a conversation while also hearing from the 641M cohort members. It's not a perfect solution, but please bear with us as we try and get creative about what it looks like to have a more diverse set of voices in the room. And just to say also that although they could not be there here with us today, they are very eager to continue in an ongoing dialogue with those who are attending PeaceCon and who are attending this session. So we would really eagerly invite you to reach out to us after this conversation if you'd like to connect directly with any of the folks that you hear from on this session today. So I'll turn it over to Namfundo now to introduce herself and share a little bit about how she got into this work.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. My name is Namfundo Walaza. I'm the co-founder of the Unyoke Foundation based in Cape Town, South Africa. I co-founded the organization with Chris Peace, who's a dialogue practitioner and peace builder extraordinaire. The Unyoke Foundation was set up to offer spaces for peace builders who work in difficult situations to come to a retreat in a quiet place in Cape Town, to figuratively take the yoke off and reflect with peers in a space that is lightly held and facilitated. The emphasis being to rest, reconnect with self and others on the journey, rejuvenate and renew. In 2016, Chris and I were contracted by AGU to consider an intervention with young South Sudanese. We decided to work with a cohort of restless young people who cared deeply for their country and wanted to make a difference, using the Unyoke process as their guiding principles. We interviewed a number of young people and ended up selecting 26, making sure that we had more women than men because we believed that women were marginalized for this peace-building space. Two dropped out along the way, and we now work with 12 males and 12 females, that the majority of whom are based in Juba, with a few in the states like Wau, Kwajok, Turale, and Nimule. We selected another cohort of 12 South Sudanese in refugee camps in Uganda, and that cohort is supported by Oxfam. And the 8 young people you will see or hear from today are part of the 24 that we are accompanying in South Sudan. How we started the process was that this cohort 1 and cohort 2, and we are cohort 0. The cohort 1 of 12 members was taken to 3 retreats in South Africa, and the cohort 2 of another 12 had 4 retreats in Uganda and South Africa and Nepal. South Africa, of course, was chosen because of the history of this country, and Nepal was chosen because John Paul Lederach, who was part of our team, was working in Nepal with some peace builders, and we wanted to expose them to that context and what was done there. The main criteria was that they represented different tribes, different communities, and are interested in different occupations. So we've got doctors, artists, a scriptwriter, students, NGO founders, a medical technician, an agriculturalist, an engineer, and those who work in and associated with different human rights organizations like Anataban. How did we do things differently, you may ask, because we do say we were wanting to do things differently in starting this. The first thing that I want to reflect on is that when the South Sudanese landed in Cape Town and were in a retreat, they were sitting in a circle with talking sticks, and they asked us where are the materials. We said, well, we don't have the materials, you are the materials, because we believe that they had what it takes to actually be able to see what can be done in their country. They told their stories. They drew a systems map of what is happening in their country. They explored the meaning of trauma in their lives. They built relationships. They talked about gender. They talked about tribes and tribalism. They formed bonds through talking through difficult conversations, and they chose to stay together. With regards to activities, we encourage them to think outside of the box and not to do things that NGOs normally do. So they started activities like TTT, working with amputees, reviving cultural dances and visiting each other's communities and learning about other cultures. Lately, they started writing peace songs. A book on the experience of amputees is in the cards, and a cohort 0 member is working with them to put together to produce a chronicle. We discouraged them from forming NGOs because they asked us at the beginning, can we form an NGO? Because we believe that sometimes, that then work goes into office space and all of that and thinking about a range of things, and the work doesn't really get done. We motivated age youth, that a young woman who was pregnant at the time, we selected the cohort, the first cohort, that she must come to the retreats, because we felt that the males would not have been excluded because they were pregnant. This meant that a baby, we fondly referred to as the future of South Sudan, attended all 3 retreats from 2 weeks old and had dedicated carer. Cohort members attended all retreats and were part and parcel of helping us think through the innovative way of working. So we had Pedro in the space, we had colleagues from Search for Common Ground, Omar and Maria, and Akwasi was in the space, John Paul came into the space, and Zoe and Jesse were in the space. And cohort 0 members visited with us when we convened joint retreats with the cohort members to introduce them to each other. The role we play at cohort 0 as the Anuk Foundation is that of accompanying the South Sudanese. We don't tell them what to do, but walk alongside them. We're making real the notion of giving back the agency to local actors. Over time, we are finding that the young people are actually accompanying us. We're getting to know more about the rhythm of the country, from listening to what they say and what they want and the way they want to lead. We share our accompaniment reflections at Cohort 0 meetings, and Cohort 0 members are also accompanying us, particularly at this time that it was difficult to actually reach out to South Sudanese, and also they are accompanying the South Sudanese. Everybody gets involved in the accompaniment process. It has been fascinating for me to see how a relationship between a donor and 3 entities spread in different parts of the world could work in the way that we were holding the space for those who are really, really suffering and try to provide the accompaniment. And I just want to say one thing that the South Sudanese reminded us about accompanying them, that one of the things that they said when we asked, what does accompaniment look like in South Sudan? They say, when you walk with somebody, when somebody visits you and you take them home, you walk with them until a point where they say, it's okay, you can go now. And that's what I think we're on the journey where the South Sudanese will eventually tell us, it's okay, you can go now. And they will continue with their journey to build a safe and prosperous South Sudan. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Mfundo. Pedro, could you share a little bit with us about how you came to be a part of this work?
Yeah, thank you, Zoe, for the invitation, for the introduction. Hello to all participants. Welcome, and thank you so much for being with us this evening for me. My name is Pedro Portela. I'm a Portuguese independent researcher. I've been working with Humanity United since 2017. My formal academic background is in systems engineering, mechanical engineering, but my life passion is bridging of the gaps between the work of social activists and that of researchers on complexity theory, systems, and network science. When having conversations about complex issues like peace building and conflict transformation, metaphors are important. We are the only species in the world that has this ability to create and communicate models of reality. And there's a lot of talk about the overwhelming complexity of today's world, but actually our societies have always had to deal with the complexity. And the way we've dealt with that complexity is by creating simplifications of the world that are prone to be communicated, shared with others, refined, improved, understood, and used for forecasting. Mathematics is only one language in which these models can be created. Metaphors are another one. Our group of peace builders has been very prolific in coming up with metaphors and models. From the forest that needs to be stewarded after a devastating wildfire, to mushrooms that are manifestations of elaborate underground networks, to bees making decisions without the central authorities, to spiders weaving webs that span across the chasms of social relationships. So I found it fitting, though, that during a conference on peace building in the time of COVID-19, we use another metaphor to explain what we're trying to achieve together. And you will hear some of our South Sudanese colleagues later in the presentations talk about the importance of spreading the quote-unquote peace virus. And I assume part of the responsibility for this metaphor, since I introduced it during one of our workshops that Mfundo was talking about on network weaving. The image was that of a small group of committed individuals passing messages of peace and cooperation while role modeling behaviors that could stick and trigger a cascade of cooperative behavior. Now, I would say this model is naive 3 years after it was introduced. So if COVID-19 has shown us anything, is that we are both victims and beneficiaries of networks. It was a network of air travel that spread this tiny little piece of genetic material all around the world in just a matter of days. And it will be the same network that will soon distribute a vaccine, hopefully also in a matter of days. But I want to highlight another network, one that is truly responsible for saving our lives every single day, that has been with us since the day we were born and will stay with us until we die. And that is a product of millions of years of evolution, while at the same time being unique to any one of us. I'm talking about our immune system, a network of cells, chemical signals, physical defenses that is able to defend our body against any type of foreign aggression. It takes only a microscopic piece of genetic material to cause havoc to our brittle societies. But it takes a complex and deep-rooted network to fight off that menace. I'd say it is the same with peace building. All it takes is a person with a knife to create havoc in our societies. But it takes a polyvalent network of peace builders to fight off the menace of conflict and heal the wounds caused by this proverbial knife. If there's one good thing about COVID-19, it has shown us that we should respect the power of networks and not be naive about them. The web of relationships in real-world social networks is barren until something starts flowing through them. Networks aren't inherently good or bad. They just are. For me, building peace is about creating the conditions for a network to be able to put up a permanent, orchestrated immune response against perennial existential threats. Over to you, Zoe.
Thank you so much for that, Pedro. All right, we're going to turn now to our first set of audio recordings introducing the 641M network, and then we have a few colleagues who will share about some of the challenges that they've experienced building their network during COVID-19.
Hello, my name is Kwal Arokwal. I am a young South Sudanese living in Uganda as a refugee. I came to settle in Uganda in 2014 after the war broke out in late 2013 in my country. I and my family came to settle here with the hope of returning very soon. But since then, the conflict dynamics back home kept deteriorating. So we sat here with the hope of returning. Until date, we're still hoping to return. When I came to settle, of course, my experiences had taught me how important it is to build peace. So I became a peace builder, a committed one, and I'm building peace through the network of young South Sudanese called the 641M. 641M is a network that was founded by 24 young South Sudanese who are being accompanied by the Antioch Foundation and Humanity United. The 24 of us sat and thought and came up with the 641M, the 64 children of one mother. As many of you might know, the conflict dynamics in South Sudan are ethnic based, and so many of the communities, when the war broke out, were radicalized against each other. There were a lot of stereotypes happening, and the barricades were created so that there was no access from one community to the other. So when we thought of what we could do in our peace building work, we thought connecting the communities was very important. It has been a very difficult journey because it is not easy to enter as a member of a certain community into the other community in which you are maximally stereotyped. But through the 641M network, we have been able to create these linkages. We have been able to build bridges, and there is so much conversation now happening. We did a lot of visits before the COVID-19, and the visits have significantly shown how much we can achieve by just a single member of a certain community entering the other community and show a good example. We have been doing this. We have been very much working hard to see the network growing, and the network has been growing. The network has been growing in a way that whenever we do a visit to a certain community, we have our spiders, those we are working with in those communities and those that we come with. And the interactions between the spiders and ourselves has been really deep. We have been interacting and we have been extending this, and we call it the virus of peace. There have been really positive responses coming from the community, especially around stereotype. For example, a visit that was done to me in the refugee settlement. Some of this community that I live with in the settlement have not seen certain members from certain communities. When one of us, Vicky from Mundari, came and did a presentation, there were a lot of surprises. They said they never believed a Mundari could do what she did. They said they never believed that a Mundari could look as beautiful as she was. They said they never believed that a Mundari could be educated and can educate others. This was just one example of so many things that we have shared and so many things that are happening. This work, like many other works, have been severely affected by COVID-19. It has been a work that was so much built on interacting with the communities and visiting one community to the other. But because of the COVID-19, we could not continue with our visits. We could not continue building the network. The network was built in a way that when you enter one community, you find people who are willing to join the cause. You find people who are willing to interact. You find people who are willing to even deepen the conversation. These are people who have been reaching out to us, asking when we are coming back again to have the same conversations. And because of the COVID-19, we have been affected so severely. In one, it has been very hard for us as the members of the 641M to sustain ourselves and our families during this difficult time. And more importantly, it has been really difficult for us to travel and meet the communities that we have met and continue building this conversation. These are some of the things among so many things that I can mention about how the COVID-19 has affected the growth of our network. I thank you for listening, and I hope that we can deepen this conversation in days ahead. Thank you.
Basically dealing with the greatest challenge that COVID has posed to me is basically dealing with the emotional weight that has come along with the impact of COVID, the fact that COVID has postponed a number of things. For some of us, it's affected career, it's affected how we can passionately do the work we do best in physical spaces, especially peace building. But then how 641M has helped me with is that I've always had an assured system of support or support system that I can tap into, so that I talk about my challenges, and just even talking about them, that there is always somebody in 641M I can talk to when I want. I think that has really been helpful. And also the fact that it's a space that is supported with some little resources, because COVID has meant that some of us have lost our ways of making a living easily, and so it has helped us survive. But also knowing that there is a place where one can share ideas easily on how to continue coping in COVID. For me, that is it. It's the emotional support. It's very important. No other platform has afforded me that as 641M has.
And then the biggest challenge that has been there is the lack of movement, the limited movement, of which all of us know because of this COVID-19. We're not able to meet physically. We can't travel also to meet some other friends in the neighboring states and countries. But then, all in all, we still try our effort as much as we can to communicate to each other. And then also the network has not been so good, as there's some poor kind of network, which has really also limited the communication status. So I would just love to say that it's a beautiful family of which the network is so stronger, and I'm proud to be part of it. I've gained new skill through the network, so it's such a marvelous family.
Hello, my name is John Ayom, and I'm a member of the 641M. And in this audio recording, I will be discussing some of the challenges we have experienced regarding the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on our activities and what we have been doing here in South Sudan. First of all, we realized that a lot of what we do and the majority of our activities rely on having people, bringing people together in an event, or having a crowd of people and engaging them, and also traveling to various areas around South Sudan. So immediately with the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic and with the resultant ban on gatherings and also ban on traveling, we found that majority of our activities ground to a halt. And this is when we realized that we rely so much on on gathering people together and talking to people and having outdoor events or large events involving crowds and also traveling. And therefore, it was a huge impact. And now, therefore, we had to look for ways to adapt. From my own estimate, I feel like we lost maybe 12 to 18 months of worth of activity, time, and impact because of COVID-19 pandemic. All the plans that we had made at the beginning of the year, we couldn't see them through. And the worst part is that we were unable to have another convening or a gathering whereby all members could decide on a certain direction to take in light of the pandemic. When everything moved online, when all meetings moved online, immediately we realized that there is a huge challenge of connectivity in South Sudan. There is very limited broadband penetration, while also broadband is unaffordable in the country. And therefore, basic connectivity outside of calls and text was almost non-existent in the beginning of the pandemic. While also not being able to gather together or to convene as members of 64-1M robbed us of the opportunity to sit down and to set a strategic direction as a group on what we are going to achieve for the year or to set new priorities in light of the pandemic. So in the beginning, meaningful communication was hard, while also realizing that, especially for some of our members who had volunteers, we found that sustaining and engaging the network of volunteers became much more difficult. However, despite all these challenges, we were able to maintain our existing relationships through phone calls and direct messages, and also through Zoom calls. Being members of the 64-1M network has really been important during this difficult period because we have been able to keep together and to maintain existing relationships when also maintaining communication regardless of the distances involved, because there are some of our core members who are spread out within South Sudan and others who are outside of South Sudan, but we are able to maintain communication and to maintain existing relationships. And this is where Cohort Zero support was really important, especially in the early days, by helping us with online tools so that we could host online convening in Zoom and be able to be in touch with the rest of the network. Also, the Cohort Zero accompaniment calls and check-ins have been important in helping to individually reach out to each cohort member to understand if there are any challenges they are facing, while also keeping them engaged in the network. And finally, the relational surveys done by Cohort Zero have also been useful to the cohort members in trying to see the evolution of relationships among the cohort members from time to time. Thank you. A question I will have to the attendees will be, how have they been able to sustain and maintain and engage their networks during this challenging time of COVID-19, especially with all these restrictions on travel and with the huge impact on the livelihoods of all the people they work with? Thank you.
So I'd invite you to respond to John Ayom's question in the comments. And as you do that, I'll turn to Pedro kind of to jump in on our first question. Pedro, we've heard all of our colleagues, but John Ayom especially, reflect on kind of the challenges of both physical and digital divides that have made it very difficult to maintain even basic communication with the network during this past year. I'm curious to hear from you how COVID-19 has changed the way that you're thinking about accompanying and supporting the network building work that 641M is doing.
Yeah, thank you, Zoe. It is still changing, and it will probably still change a lot, but so far I have identified for me 3 points of reflection. The first one is a generic one about the nature of the pandemic, which is both a complicated health problem, one that is understandable, solvable, given time and resources. And there is, at the same time, a complex social problem, which is uncertain, wicked, manageable, but not really solvable. And this is one that instills fear in people, and which some states / governments / political groups may take advantage of to advance on this autocratization agenda by proposing easy fixes and by claiming that they have the solution for the pandemic. So it is even more crucial for civil society networks to mobilize, connect, and to organize. And this is made much more difficult with the measures put in place to try to contain the pandemic. So there is this hard tension to ease between the pressure to counter this tendency for autocratization and the need to self-isolate and social distance. And this brings me to the next point, which is how do we do this organizing online? So the second point of my reflection on this pandemic has highlighted how much of our daily lives is mediated by digital tools and how they became so fundamental for our complex societies to keep functioning. Even in places like South Sudan, where, as we heard, internet coverage is spotty at best, communication still happens. It happens through mediated channels. So it is difficult for networks which are spread out throughout the country to physically meet. And so communication happens asynchronously via WhatsApp, email, cell phones, SMS, and I've heard sometimes even FM radios. And perhaps because we've suddenly lost this ability to do unmediated interaction, I'm finding it very, very difficult to replace it exclusively by the mediated one. There is something fundamental that is lost in the mediated form of interaction, but yet it is here to stay. And these tools may help us forward in our struggles. It is not immediate that they will help, but they can. But it's sometimes even more important to invest time and energy in governing this online interaction, which brings me to point number 3. So this year I had a lot of time to think, and I had to continuously fight the urge to pretend all of our work in accompanying an emergent network of peace builders is simply replaceable by Zoom calls or WhatsApp group chats. This is not business as usual. I've heard or read in an article that Sir Isaac Newton did his most creative work while self-isolating during the Great Plague. I'm not sure this is true or not, but it certainly is a good story. And one that reminded me that this is perhaps nature's way of saying stop and think. Stop driving the productivity car, park it, and take some time to look under the hood and make some proper maintenance. And for networks, this means spending some time thinking and writing and reflecting about what are, for me, 3 fundamental questions. What do we want to achieve together? When will we know that we are getting there or making progress? And how will we make decisions together? So this pandemic will go away eventually, that's for sure, and we'll go back to some kind of normalcy in our lives, hopefully pretty soon. But by then, it will be very important that our networks get their act together by agreeing on how they're going to operate together, make decisions which integrate all of the voices. And this is easier said than done.
Thank you, Pedro. We're going to turn now to a brief video from a couple other colleagues to share also on this question of what's lost, but what also do we have to potentially carry forward?
To me it was not really an easy time for 64 members because the virus scattered or separate the members of 64-1M in different places. All the family was scattered into pieces. Other person is in other place and the other person in other place, and there is no way for us to come again because of the virus. Number 2, again, it was really a higher level of psychological problem among us ourselves, because sometimes you feel like you need to meet again with your sister or your brother or members of 64-1M, but it is not easy because of virus, of which increase psychological problem among us ourselves. That is what I can say, and that is what I really observe during all this time. And thank you.
Hey, I'm Tara, a cohort member in South Sudan. I want to share a few reflections on our work amidst COVID-19 in South Sudan. COVID came with a lot of challenges that has made us lose a lot of things, especially time. A lot of time has been lost. We had a lot of plans this year on how to visit our amputees at the States and also hold some Juba meetings, but that time has been lost simply because of social distancing, which we are not allowed to gather. It is not at some point it was not possible to travel to the field, and if you were to travel to the States, it was not also possible to meet physically. So a lot of time has been wasted. So a lot of time has been lost. And it has been a huge challenge to meet physically. And this year it has not happened. And with this, we just realized that the freedom we had, maybe at some point we took it for granted, because it's now that we realize that you can't do much on phone or when you can't meet physically. So, and we've accepted that it's difficult to build relationship on phone. You can only build relationship when you have physical contact with a person. And this year, I think we've lost more than we've gained anything. I don't think I would say there was anything that was gained. Maybe the only thing that would sound like so is at least everyone is okay, everyone is healthy, but not much has been gained. Most of the time we've used direct calls, which has not been very helpful, because direct call you can only talk to one person at a time. So there is no that gathering of being able to be a group, to be in a group, because of what I said earlier, that communication infrastructure is very poor here in South Sudan, and most people can't afford a smartphone. But being a family as 64-1M has been helpful, because at some point we were able to do a Zoom call, and that was helpful at some point. It has also been helpful to have 64-1M, especially when you're going through challenges. You are able to call one or two people and tell them what you're feeling, and you get some support.
So, Mfundo, Chara has reflected on what has been lost and what has been gained. I'd ask you the same question. What is lost and what is gained when you can't physically sit people around the table and look them in their eyes when you hear their stories?
think it's often in these times easier to answer the question of loss because that we can see very visibly. There is a sense that people are not traveling, so people are not meeting. There is a sense that people are not in the same space, so people cannot actually comfort each other. They can't. I mean, as I was talking to somebody and I was visiting, and just the realization that you can't even give somebody a hug is what we've lost. So human connection has been lost, and we are human beings. So often in times of difficulty, we need that human touch. We need somebody to say it will be okay. So that is gone. But I think what we are, for me, it's almost like when we are on the other side of this, we're going to look back and see much more clearly what we actually gained and what we had to change. And I think those things that have made us adapt to do things differently are some of the things that we've gained. One of the things that I'd like to really reflect upon, and I was talking about it in a session yesterday, is that I think because we stopped, almost like the world went into a halt and we all stopped, we're able to listen more. We're able to pay much more attention. We're made more intentional in what we do. And I think for me, it was one of those things that also we were able to come to ourselves more and listen to ourselves, to listen to our heartbeats, as I said yesterday, and just be more present with ourselves, because we can only help the other people, if we are able to actually know where we stand, if we're able to hear our own thinking. And so I think that was one thing that I think has been gained. The other thing that I think has been gained in a way that we may see afterwards is how we shifted, as I said, but how we became much more present, how we connected more. I mean, this year, I feel, and I'm sure some people also would say that, we've connected to people that we sometimes don't connect to. So there was a loss and a gain at the same time on the same issue of connectivity, because I think people wanted to connect more. People reached out more to find out if people were still okay. People reached out more to find out, even in cohort 0, Chris and I were initially mostly accompanying. We then expanded the pool of accompaniers to include everybody. Everybody was accompanying this year. So we worked as a much more broader team to accompany. And I think that we also are seeing more the acts of resilience, the acts of people bouncing back, not from where we describe it as people who are working in a particular setting where we say, you know, the South Sudanese are resilient, but I think the South Sudanese are seeing their own resilience because they are having to reflect on what they have to do to adapt and adjust. And the other thing that I wanted to mention, which I think is actually quite important over the notion of just the seeing of the resilience, is how people reached out to others. And you know, the example that there are people who got a little bit of money and were able to use that in order to empower a community to do a vegetable garden. Because I think we're much more connecting the devastation of the environment to how we have done as humanity. The things that we've done that have caused that we can't actually get much of the fruits from the land because we've done so much. And I think we're beginning to make those connections. But I think in terms of really counting the gains of this time, when we are on the other side, we'll be able to see much more clearly what we actually gained. But there are some things that I think are beginning to show that people were gaining some things, even through just being much more present with themselves and listening to themselves more and being able to pay much more attention and being able to actually hear. And you know, you listen to the TV, you see people die, and you connect to that as a human being. In the way that in the past we were so busy, you know, there would be in the TV 50 people died in this place and you wouldn't even notice because you're so busy running. And I think we have had to stop and actually listen. And I think for me that is part and parcel of what makes us human beings who are able to then respond to other human beings from a point of resonance, from a point of a feeling for, rather than just doing things because we're doing it as a job. And I think that's part of what we're gaining, but we'll see the fruits of it at the end of this, which I hope is coming soon.
Thank you very much, Namfundo. I think we will turn now. Oh, sorry, can you all hear me all right? I had a little internet issue. I think we'll turn now to some more audio from some of our colleagues.
My name is Bush Buse, member of 641M, and
My name is
together.
Bush Buse,
I am glad
member
to be
of
joining you
641M
virtually
and Take
from
Tea
the
together.
youngest nation, the Republic of
I
South
am glad to
Sudan.
be joining
in this
you
program,
virtually from the youngest
this
nation, the Republic
conference
of South Sudan. In this
organized under the theme accompanying and building relationship during COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic has actually caused a significant impact in the lives of many people globally, and South Sudan is not an exception because thousands of people have been infected in this country. More than 50 people were reported to have died of COVID-19. Livelihood activities have been disrupted. Cases of crimes, cases of trauma, cases of suicide have increased because of the pressure brought about by COVID-19. Social gatherings that used to bring people to discuss issues and relieve stress and reduce the level of trauma have been suspended. For example, TTT, the Take Tea Together, that we used to organize in the shades of community trees known as peace trees, okay, that would bring members of the community to discuss issues that affect them, okay. During TTT, they also get entertained by comedians, by musicians, traditional dancers, a forum theater, and other entertainment activities that would help reduce the level of trauma, because already the communities have suffered a lot, okay, from the conflicts. Many people have been displaced, many people have lost their dear ones, and those memories are still there. So activities like TTT and other social gatherings would help address some of these psychosocial issues. But COVID-19 has also made an addition to the problems that South Sudan is already facing. Our planned activities like 641M, the convenings and meetings could not take place because of travel restriction, and also restriction on gatherings. Communication was affected because when we cannot meet physically, it means we're supposed to have virtual meetings, but this could not happen because some places you cannot easily have access to internet. So these are some of the challenges that really affected us as a result of COVID-19. I don't want to sound completely discouraged because still there is a window of hope, this window of opportunity. Some good things have happened despite the pandemic, the COVID-19. We were able to do some activities to try and give hope to the hopeless, to try and contribute to peace and conflict transformation. We compose peace songs and short film documentaries to be shared on social media, radio, and television. We had live radio talk shows to discuss about topics that are relevant to South Sudanese. We talk about the role of youth in nation building. We talk about peace. We also had some virtual meetings with some members who were able to access internet through WhatsApp and Zoom. At some point, we had smaller face-to-face meetings while observing the measures of COVID-19 prevention. So these are some of the things that we were able to do as young South Sudanese peace builders.
So it's been, it's been a tight moment or a tight situation whereby COVID-19 has increased our issues, our problems. But because we rely so much on networking, that's why you see us, we are still holding to who we are and to be able to carry on. Because still with those challenges, we still need to have what we need to do, and especially as peace builders, we need not to wait for any disaster to happen, because disasters are things that can come anytime. Like pandemic, nobody planned for it, but here it is. It came in a time that we were to do something. So for that reason, we still need to move on as peace builders, and with any challenge that will face us ahead. It is always there. You either face challenge, and road to success is always carved, and most especially to us peace builders. We always need to be ready for anything that will come a long way. So the hope and the faith of being a peace builder, and more especially myself as a woman, I always feel that I should move on, and I should also encourage other people to move on, because there are most vulnerable people back into the communities that are very much vulnerable, more than us. As sometimes we are better, we are in town, we can communicate, but at home you can walk like some hours for you to go and send the message. So why don't we actually join hands and we overcome those challenges, and we continue working for peace, and see what ways that can better our job or our work that we do towards peace building. With these few remarks, I would congratulate all of you, and have a zeal of being always in the front line, non-violently, as a peace builder. Be resilient, be patient, also get your self-time to learn from other person, and make sure you always pass the message when you have something that you need to transfer to the other person. Please do, because that is the only way that peace will always spread. And this is peace results are always the seeds that we plant for the next generation.
Yes, spoken well by Rose Achindel. I just, Zoe, I wanted to go back to just ask you a question. During this year, all of Cohort Zero, I did mention that all of Cohort Zero has been accompanying South Sudanese in various ways. From the position you hold at AGU, can you reflect on what you have learned from the accompaniment conversations, and what, if any, reflections have made you realize that donors or supporters have to shift the way they engage with local actors?
Yeah, thank you, Nymphundo. It's funny, we were just, the three of us with some other colleagues were having a very similar conversation this morning, and one of our other colleagues made this statement: just because you can't see it doesn't mean things aren't happening. And I feel like that is just such a perfect summary of the lesson, particularly for those of us who sit in the position of being donors. And I think even more than not being able to see it, even the things that we do see don't always mean the things that we think they do. And we all have our own mental models that we're using to make meaning of what's happening in the world around us. And particularly for those who sit in this particular seat of privilege, it's really imperative and so critical that we're able to really recognize the filters that are over our eyes as we're trying to understand what's taking place with the folks that we are working with and accompanying. And I think we're here talking about building networks, and at the end of the day, building networks is about building relationships. Yeah. And for those of us who are outside of the context that we are a part of or working in, those relationships are even more critical for kind of guiding how we are showing up and making sure that, we are appropriately making meaning of the things that we are seeing, or that we are able to have insight into those things that we have blinders and aren't able to see. And so I think that's where, coming off those reflections from Rose, it's just absolutely imperative that, for myself at HU to be accompanied by individuals like Rose who are able to, tell us like it is and tell us honestly what's happening. And you heard her at the end of that reflection giving such wonderful advice to peace builders everywhere about how to be showing up and how to be engaging. And that's just so tremendously valuable to those of us who are, accompanying peace builders in contexts other than our own. And I think in 2020, that's become even more important than we would have realized. Over the past several years, I've had the privilege and luxury of being able to go to South Sudan and being able to meet with members of the network face to face in different contexts, in different spaces, to sit in unyoke sessions with them, to sit, face to face with work that they're doing. And that gives you a level of insight that just hasn't been replaced this year with WhatsApp messages and phone calls and photos and whatever it may be. You can't, Nomfundo, as you spoke to earlier, and Pedro as well, there's something different about sitting face to face with folks. But I think the lesson of 2020 is, even though it looks different, doesn't mean that we can't find ways to adapt. And that's where really leaning into those trusting relationships that we've built to guide us and to understand what we're seeing and hearing, and to be able to trust and take a step back and say, just because I can't see what's happening doesn't mean that things aren't happening, is easier said than done, I think, for donors. And it's a lesson that we're really trying to learn, and, finding ways to walk the talk, and some days doing a better job than others at it. Nomfundo, I think that also brings me to a question that I want to ask you as well. Hearing Bush and Rose reflect on kind of the resilience of the network this year and how they've still kind of managed to adapt and managed to bring such optimism and creative spirit to their work. I'm curious what lessons are emerging for you that are relevant to the broader field of peace building that you're seeing coming from the 641M network in South Sudan.
One of the things that stays with me is that if you give individuals a space to innovate and be and actually think outside of the box, and that in itself, I think, says a lot about, because if you're thinking outside of the box, you do something that is resonant, then that gives energy, and that also kind of carries your work. The other thing that I'm learning from this whole network is that, in actual fact, at the end of the day, building relationships is key. So where the South Sudanese started by telling their stories and building from that, I've worked in the peace field for a long time. And I know that people do it as a project because they kind of tick a box. They are told by funders what to do. And these young people are entering this field from building relationships, caring for each other, phoning each other, being with each other, being in each other's weddings, birthdays, supporting each other, showing up for each other. And in a way, when a crisis arises and they come together, that's much more stronger because they've weaved a network of connections that is just larger than you just working with somebody because you are in a program at a particular organization and you have to show up. And you're taking a box because you've got to report back to somebody who's asked you to go to that community to do something. And these young people are not being asked to do something. They look at what is happening in their communities. They communicate on WhatsApp. They decide, let's go. Or can somebody do something about this? So it's much more, and they're coming from it, from building relationships and from terming themselves as we are family. And I think one of the things that I'm learning is that accompanying peace builders and walking alongside them and not telling them what to do and not coming with South African solutions to a South Sudanese context and listening very carefully, and actually allowing the young people to be able to say, we tried this and it didn't work, and we're going to try something else. And that brings resiliency, that brings that sense of we can do this. Because, you know, when you do something and you fail, you do something else and it succeeds, then there is something that your confidence is built, not your capacity, your confidence is built in this time. And I think there is something that is, you can see it. We are watching it as these young people are building nodes of roots that will flourish one day. But they're starting from just, you know, finding out how to stay together, how to be in relationship with each other, how to support each other, how to show up for each other, how to, yeah, I mean, I'm just completely taken. And I've done peace building for years, where we did it as a project, and you convene people in a space, and you said, okay, we're talking about gender-based violence today. That's not what we're doing. We're getting them to actually come, something happens that leads to a question around gender-based violence, and then they enter into that conversation. I remember when we met the first group in Cape Town, and for the first 2 days, they say, we're South Sudanese, we're not tribes. But by the third session of our retreats, something around tribe came up, and they realized they had to actually open up and talk about it. So it's been lots and lots of lessons, and also learning to work with AGU and the two other entities as a cohort zero, and be able to hold each other space and be able to critically look at what we're doing from various points and support each other. So we're holding a space for South Sudanese, they're holding a space for us. So there's an accompaniment that is happening on both sides. And that, I think, for me, is a sweet spot of where resilience lies, when you can build a network that captures all the work that has to be done from us, from them, and from everybody. And that they can phone you, Zoe, they can phone me, somebody can phone Pedro to ask for a question. And they don't see it as just people there who are just going to dish out resources to be able to do something, but they can't actually connect with us as human beings. And I think what we've done, which is quite strong, is actually in them building their relationships through telling their stories. They've had to hear our own stories in the mix. And they know us a little bit more than when people are just like, that person is there and that person is there. So this has been wonderful.
Thank you, Nomfundo. I know you had a question for Pedro, so.
I have a question for Pedro. Uncle Net, and the South Sudanese call you Uncle Net, and I love that. I know you're probably too young to be called an Uncle Net by a group of young people, but you are. The question I want to ask you, Pedro, is that network weaving is a big part of the work we're undertaking with 641M, 64 children of the One Mother members in South Sudan. Given your understanding of where we are right now, what are the challenges posed by the weaving of networks in South Sudan? And what are we learning from local actors re these challenges and how to overcome them? What are the things that we're learning from our colleagues, from our family?
Well, I want to underline something you and Zoe already said. And apparently this lesson is very, very present for us all, which is that, well, I like to think of it as we're not that important after all. I mean, things keep happening, conversations keep taking place under our radar, and people find other ways to connect and have the important conversations without us even knowing about it, and that's fascinating. It's like one of the metaphors we use is the metaphor of the mushrooms and the network of rhizomes and mycelium underground. We don't see it, but we only see when the mushroom pops out of the earth. But there is this incredible mesh of networks underneath that we don't see and that we probably will never see. And I've started, as the background in engineering and in the hard sciences, my first attempt was to uncover all of these connections and let's map these out. Let's understand all of them. And now it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, at least to do this kind of very analytical work of dissecting all of the relationships. It doesn't. That's not the way it works. There are a couple of nice books, a lot of online articles and blog posts written in social innovation forums and systems change forums that suggest all of these tools and methods to fast forward the process of weaving this social fabric back together. Most of these are written by and for our Western culture. What my South Sudanese friends have taught me, and this was also a new experience for me, is that these kind of methodologies are indeed written with a worldview, and they do their things. They do their own. They own the process. They do the things their way. They own the timing. They own the language. In the end, we're all talking about the same kind of basic human process of working together, but the language in which this is done is so different than mine. And you've seen this happen. I have to first sit humbly in the circle and learn how do they do it, instead of simply prescribing how they should do it. And this in turn opens up a series of really tough questions for us, namely, what is our role in this network weaving enterprise? When all of our education and all of our mental models is around doing stuff, is around designing things, and around project, around beginning, middle, and an end. We're not used to thinking in long-term processes. So for me personally, this hits me very, very deeply because I am someone who is used to the design process, to the engineering of things. And so my South Sudanese friends have actually started a revolution for me.
Thank you, Pedro. Such a, I think, important reflection on the revolution that it started in all of us and working and learning from this network. I'd love now if we could turn to conversation with folks who are in the audience. I see Ariane Noor, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, has put out this question. What would you recommend for those trying to build networks in the region in the current COVID world? Is there a way for us to build meaningful connections without the initial in-person contact that your network had? It's an excellent question. Mfundo, I look to you first because I suspect that you have some thoughts on this.
I'm reading the question. Okay, let's see. Yeah, is there a way for us to still build meaningful connections? It's a difficult one, but I think my answer initially was that even though, it's also relative, because if you're looking at it in terms of us building networks or building connections with the South Sudanese, which involves traveling, that's one part. But if you're looking at the South Sudanese themselves trying to form networks within their own space, it all depends as to what restrictions there are. And from what I'm hearing, they were saying to us, they were laughing the other day saying, well, social distancing is not quite what we have to deal with here. So I think there are moments or opportunities for people to connect. But I think for them, what they were saying to us is also that they can't go to the other states. They are kind of locked up in one place. So So I think it's very difficult to say whether we can actually build meaningful connections, but people are trying various ways to talk more on the phone, to connect more around, around Zoom calls, to do more. I mean, I've found actually that I think human beings have been talking much more. I mean, I've talked to more people than that I never used to talk to. So maybe there's a way that we can also see this as a way that it's open channels of communication in the way that in the past we didn't have, because we're so busy traveling, so busy looking after our own stuff and not really connecting to others. I was talking yesterday in another session and I said, just even driving around and being conscious of the people on the street who don't have places to live. It's a human connection for me. So the human connection extends beyond even the work that we do, but to connect to others in a way that we have not been connecting before, in a way that we didn't see. We're seeing more and hearing more and connecting, I think, a little bit much more than we used to.
Mfundo, I think that human connection piece is just so fundamental in this conversation. And of course, that's going to look different. So we've been speaking at length in this conversation about the context of South Sudan, in which, there's very specific nuances of what it looks like to build relationships in South Sudan. And part of the process is uncovering what exactly it means to build human connection with the specific set or context or place that you are working with and involved in. So I think myself, I'm an American, I live in California. The majority of people in my organization that I connect with are in the United States. And I think something that we're learning in the culture that we live in is how to actually bring that human connection into the workplace and bring it into the way that we're showing up in relationship with each other. And that, Mfundo actually was on a panel yesterday in which she spoke really eloquently about, finding the space to cry in between Zoom calls and to be human and to not just be this person that's on a computer screen, but that we are so much more behind the screen. And that's the fundamental building block behind, how we're making these connections. And while it may be more difficult to do that digitally, it's absolutely possible to find ways to bring our full selves into these conversations beyond just, buttoned up for a professional meeting and then, closing out the agenda and walking away. Pedro, would you like to jump in?
Yeah, I would add maybe a pessimistic version of this. I don't think it is really it is replaceable. It's not replaceable. The way I cope with this is that this is temporary, and we'll be back to sitting in a circle sooner rather than later. I can't imagine a world where this is the norm. In fact, there is a novel written in the beginning of the 20th century called "The Machine Stops," which describes this dystopian future that we are living in right now. But this has become the norm. But while we can't, there are a couple of things we can try to do to improve a little bit on the quality of this initial seed. And for me, it is working on very simple and practical issues, doing stuff together remotely. Nothing, probably it's an exaggeration, but there are a few things that makes you know someone better and create a connection than working on a small project together. Be it the writing of blog posts, recording of a video, preparing a session for PeaceCon remotely. These are all little projects that we can do remotely that can at least help while we can't shake hands again and see eye to eye again.
Thank you, Pedro. Are there any other questions? And folks can feel free to jump in with video and audio if you'd like to as well. And while we wait to see if there's any other questions, Namfundo, maybe I'll pose another question to you that jumps out. I'm curious, coming off of your many years of experience in the field of peace building, what this work with Pedro and this work adopting a network weaving lens, how that has changed or impacted the way that you're thinking about what peace building looks like.
I must say, I think that's a very good question, Zoe, because I haven't worked in the context or with a network weaver in the work that I've done before. And we almost like always assumed that people will make the networks. I mean, people will talk about networks. It's amazing actually sitting here and thinking how many words we used. And we talked about it, but we never did anything about it. So we almost like thought the word in itself will make sure that things happen. So we talked about, networking. And that was actually going to conferences and giving people your business cards. And those business cards went into pockets. And sometimes they will phone you and sometimes they won't phone you. And that was what we called network then. And to learn from Pedro and to see how one can actually intentionally get a group of young people to think creatively about how they build networks. But I think what was important, Pedro, for me, was the acknowledgement that South Sudanese actually know how to build networks. So it's about how do we listen to what they do? How do you listen to what they do and add to that, rather than say, this is the way you're going to do it. And I think we've come to that point where there's a recognition that there are Western models of doing things and there are African models of doing things. And one of the things that we need to do as peace builders is really go into a context. I used to say in the past, you walk into a village and there is drumming. And what you need to do is to listen to the sound of the drums before you start drumming, because then you can then be in tune with the music. Because otherwise, if you come and drum and I was talking about it myself, having been trained as a psychologist in a Eurocentric mode, that I was kind of completely out of sync with what was happening in my own community. I wasn't understanding the problems because I was listening with a different ear. And so for me, I think this whole notion of networking in the way that we're doing it, but in not taking away the agency of the South Sudanese, but looking at how they're doing things and what they are responding to, because it's also about that. It's about what makes sense. And when they kind of say, then that makes sense. That seems to resonate. And it's about looking at those points of resonance. And I've learned so much, being part of this, and also the fact that just because we say the words doesn't mean that things then happen. We can't build networks just by simply saying networking and writing fancy books around it, or writing in our, even with monitoring, learning and evaluation, and just the different way in which Search for Common Ground is doing that work has been amazing. It's been something that I didn't recognize, or at least wasn't part of what I was doing in the past. In actual fact, I hated those things, but now I love seeing the relational survey. I love hearing Omar talk about the kinds of stuff that the South Sudanese are talking about how they're building relationships and who's talking to whom. And all of that becomes quite exciting because we're talking about it as a team. We're not just having somebody sitting in an office and just ticking boxes and then presenting to funders something that looks quite pretty. And then, you get more money to do more. But that more is actually nothing, because at the end of the day, it's like everybody would have gone into that like a duck that goes into water and comes out completely dry. So it's been wonderful to actually work in this way, where we're making sure that we're listening more than we are talking. And we're making the words make sense. When we're talking support, and I think accompaniment support, how does that look like? How does support look like? How do you accompany people and support them in a way that is meaningful, in a way that you walk alongside them? Not with judgment, but with a curiosity to learn and also let them lead you to where they want to go, rather than we do it this way in my country, so can you do it that way? I know I've gone all over the place, Pedro, but
Pedro, do you have any reflections on that, or shall we jump to some of these questions here in the chat?
Let's jump to some of the questions. We have a few already.
Yes, we have. So there's one comment, Namfundo, to you, really important thoughts. Can you all capture these ideas about another approach to networking, an African approach? It would help to inform all of our work and also validate these alternative approaches. And just to jump in and say absolutely, and that's something that we're really hoping to do and hoping to work on, but would also really love to continue to be in conversation with others who have different experiences or perspectives to also help inform how we're thinking about this. And then also the question, how will you see the work you do going forward differently after COVID? That's an excellent question. Anyone want to jump in on that? I mean, I think maybe I can share a couple of thoughts from my perspective, and I think it relates to what I was saying earlier about that idea of just because you don't see something happening doesn't mean it's happening. And there was a very large portion of this year, particularly early at the beginning of the pandemic, in which my focus was almost singularly on how are we going to adapt, how are we going to change and evolve in response to COVID. And I think that was, while an important question to ask, also misguided in that it lost sight of paying most attention and putting the most importance on what was emerging from the partners that we are working with and accompanying and following. And so while the South Sudanese network is making many adaptations to the work that they're doing, largely around thinking about, how they handle large-scale convenings and gatherings and those sort of things, and shifting more towards like smaller conversation type models or groups of people. I think for us as an accompaniment team, it's actually what we've learned most importantly this year has been to stay the course, and that really our attention should always continue to be on listening and then responding to what we're hearing, rather than trying to completely restructure or change the way that we're showing up because of this global pandemic that in reality has changed many things for us as individuals who are in more privileged locations and positions. But for the South Sudanese, like for many of them, this was yet another challenge in a series of already very challenging circumstances that they have to overcome on a daily basis. And they already know what it looks like to adapt and to be resilient and to keep moving forward. And so more than anything, this year was a lesson for us on how we actually show up with that same level of resilience and adaptability.
Exactly, Zoe. You took the words right off my mouth. There is one thing, there's one big lesson I take from working with my South Sudanese colleagues, one that I shared with my friends over here who are, probably not even aware of the troubles in this part of the world. And I tell them, there is really nothing you can, teach, quote unquote, teach about networks and complexity to people who are, survivors of a civil war, that have gone through a civil war, that have gone through existential threats every day. They know about complexity. They know how to weave networks. We're not there to teach them anything. And in fact, throughout this year, I've said what a privilege. I've thought what a privilege I had to be able to learn from them how to prioritize and how to keep your act together during this very complex and volatile year where you don't know what tomorrow is going to look like. And this is a privilege. To know how tomorrow is going to look like is a privilege that many people in the world don't have. And I had never felt this before. And I feel doubly privileged now that I had experienced, or I had learned from my South Sudanese colleagues how you go about with life without knowing how tomorrow is going to look like, and that you can and you should go on happily with your life without knowing what tomorrow is going to look like.
I think as you say that, Pedro, the word that comes to me is this has been a lesson in humility, in really being humbled and recognizing that. And for me, it's not about, quantifying who suffers more, but being able to appreciate how somebody wakes up every day, sometimes not even knowing whether they're going to eat at the end of the day, but they continue wanting to work in peace, meaning that they continue being there for others, because it's a selfless exercise. One is doing it for the benefit of the community, for the benefit of those. And it's just, this has really been a lesson in humility, watching how our South Sudanese colleagues continue striving and walking forward in spite of the difficulties that they face every day.
Thank you, Nomfundo. And just wanted to say thank you all for joining us today. I know we're right up at our time. I would love for those of you who are here to just leave in the chat maybe one word about something that you're thinking about or taking away from our conversation today. And I really hope that we can continue to stay in touch. Please feel free to reach out to any of us. We would love to continue these conversations, and are really grateful for all of you taking the time today. So thank you very much.
Thank you.